Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the entry-level driver training for student transportation webinar today, January 11th, 2022. We all made it to 2022. Hooray! As we are waiting for folks to join us, I've got a couple introductions that I'd like to make. First and foremost, my name is Craig Hart. I'm with Vertical Alliance Group. I am part of our events team, and my background is in distance learning, primarily in the financial services industry before transitioning over to the transportation industry. And my co-host for most of my webinars for the last year or so has been Mr. Mark Ray. Mark is a former trucking executive with over 35 years experience working with new drivers and bringing them on board. Since he has retired from actively being a trucking executive, though, he still stays very much plugged into the transportation world. He works with community colleges, consults with different organizations, both within and out of the transportation industry, focusing on kind of those forthcoming issues that we're going to be dealing with, like the electrification of fleets and so forth. So, Mark, it's lovely to have you with us here today, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
In addition to Mark, we have Jeremy Rose. Now, Jeremy is the video production manager with Vertical Alliance Group, and that title is probably not appropriate. Jeremy's basically been involved with the creation of every piece of training content that we have done for well over 10 years. And for some of you out there who have actually gone through our training in the past, you may even be familiar with his voice. When you hear him speak today, he is the person that manages the team that creates and puts together all the content, including the ELDT content, which is why we are thrilled to have him here with us today. And then last but definitely not least, we are joined by Leslie Smith. And Leslie is our school specialist here on our end. She handles our student transportation division. She has done just about everything that you can do at our organization. She began in our client success department and worked there for several years, helping organizations basically get as much out of the platform as they could in terms of making sure that their drivers were trained, that the reporting records were complete, and that they were having a great experience with the platform. That was before she transitioned over to basically do the same thing with our student transportation folks as well. So Jeremy, Leslie, thank you for joining us here today. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to talk a lot today about student transportation. And for some of you on this call, this may be a brand new world that you are dipping your toe into for the very first time. And we're probably going to talk about some stuff that you may have some questions about that you would like to tackle offline and don't want to ask on air. And to that effect, and it's one of the reasons that we have Leslie on board with us today, is we do have the ability to do demos of our platform so we can show you exactly what we're talking about today. If you would like to set up a time with Leslie, and we'll share these details a little bit later on in the presentation as well. Here is her phone number and her email address so that you can follow up with her directly. She works with all of our student transportation groups, both the school districts as well as private companies that do student transportation. She's having these conversations all day, every day at this point, as school districts around the country are grappling with the challenge of making sure that they are set up for ELDT training. One other thing I did want to make you all aware of is this is a responsive event. We're not just here to talk at you. We want to talk with you. So if you do have questions about the material that we cover today, please ask. And the easiest way to do that is in the menu bar at the top of your screen. There's a button that says chat. Go ahead and click on that, and that will open up a secondary window. And at the bottom of that window, there is a button that says to presenters and panelists. You can change that, though, if you click on it, to everyone. And that way, anyone can see the questions that you ask of us, because none of us is as smart as all of us. And there are probably some questions that you have that may be shared by others that it would be valuable if they could get those answers as well. So please let us know if you have questions as we go through this. And go ahead and fire up your chat. And just to try it out, let us know who you are, where you are from. We'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and do that right now. Now, let us talk about where does ELDT training fit into the grand scheme of the new driver licensing process. Well, obviously, the CDL application, the commercial learner's permit, or the student, or excuse me, the for student transportation as well, not necessarily for truck driving, though we do work with those folks also. Those steps have not changed. This ELDT process basically is lodged in the middle of this pipeline and is composed of two different parts. The theory content training that needs to take effect, and that's what we're going to discuss and focus on today, and then the behind the wheel training portion that needs to occur. And that actually, we'll talk a little bit about how you can get set up as a training provider to accommodate that for your company or school district as well. And then the skills training, skills test, CDL from the state, those pieces of the puzzle have not changed as well. So this middle box is where we are going to focus today. And without further ado, Jeremy, I will kick this over to you so you can get started bringing everybody up to speed.
Thanks, Craig. Hey, everyone. Once again, my name is Jeremy Rose. I am the video production manager for Infinit-I Workforce Solutions. Before we get too far into this, I do want to go ahead and throw out that I am slightly under the weather, so I apologize if I am a little fatigued or not as energetic as I might normally be, or if I have any coughing episodes or anything like that. So fair warning, we'll try to get through this as seamless as possible though. So today we're going to talk about entry-level driver training, the new training regulations from the FMCSA. Please note that this presentation is designed for those who have little to no prior knowledge about entry-level driver training, what it is or why it's important. If you're already relatively familiar with the new regulations, then most of this information is not going to be new to you. That being said, there is a lot of specific material to cover in these new regulations, more than we have time to go over here. If your question is not answered during this presentation, there will be a Q&A event afterwards, so please don't hesitate to submit a question for that. Or if you're the type that just likes to get your own hands dirty, or you'd like to brush up on things yourself, all of this information is available online in the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations at www.ecfr.gov, specifically under Title 49, Part 380, Special Training Requirements. You can also find more information about the Training Provider Registry, which we will discuss at length, at www.tpr.fmcsa.gov. dot.gov. I almost always do the ... in that, so I'm glad I got that right that time. This presentation will focus on general ELDT information as well as specific information for Class B, S, and P endorsements. So let's jump into things. Next slide, please. What is entry-level driver training? Beginning February 7th, 2022, entry-level drivers will be subject to the requirements in the Entry-Level Driver Training, or ELDT, regulations. The whole purpose of this is to set a minimum standard of training requirements for entry-level CDL holders. These regulations are established by the FMCSA. Next slide, please. Who does this apply to? These new regulations apply specifically to drivers obtaining a Class A or Class B CDL for the first time, upgrading an existing Class B CDL to a Class A CDL, or obtaining a School Bus S, Passenger P, or Hazardous Materials H endorsement for the first time. This is very specific, right? These are all for the first time, okay? Next slide, please. What about current CDL holders? ELDT regulations are not retroactive, meaning the entry-level driver training requirements do not apply to individuals holding a valid CDL or an SP or H endorsement issued prior to February 7th, 2022. If an applicant who obtains a commercial learner's permit prior to February 7th, 2022, obtains a CDL before the CLP or the renewed CLP expires, then the applicant is not subject to the ELDT requirements. Next slide, please. All right, what's the point of all this? The ELDT regulations establish a federal standard for training CDL applicants. Applicants must successfully complete this training before they will be permitted to take the CDL skills test, or in the case of the H endorsement, the knowledge test. This means that all new entry-level drivers should have roughly the same amount of training when they take their CDL or endorsement tests. The desire here is to prevent untrained individuals from obtaining a CDL or endorsement, and to make sure that all entry-level drivers meet the necessary basic thresholds to safely operate a CMV. Next slide, please.
I'd like to point out, Jeremy, on this slide that to make very clear that there is no time requirement associated with the federal standard. So it's not a 40-hour requirement that all drivers need to complete. They have designated specific subjects that they want to make sure that drivers all have a basic understanding level for and be able to demonstrate that. And so we want you to know that there is no time requirement. So what we're going to talk about when it comes to the theory training and the behind the wheel training, while we are going to keep track of time that is spent, there is no minimum required that must be satisfied.
And a CDL holder that needs to add the S endorsement is subjected, is a required ELDT.
Yeah, so if you already have Class B, for example, and you're just seeking your S endorsement, yeah, you will have to go through the S endorsement specific requirements for entry-level driver training. Each of the different individual Class A, Class B, S, P, H all have their own individual specific requirements. So, new slide, or this slide. Now that we know who's affected by entry-level driver training regulations, let's talk a little bit about what the training actually looks like. There's no federally mandated amount of training time that a driver trainee must complete for entry-level driver training. The FMCSA only requires that training cover all topics set forth by the FMCSA. The required topics are broken into two sections, theory and behind the wheel. Behind the wheel is broken into two further sections, range and public road. As a note, Infinit-I Workforce Solutions as a platform only handles online training, so I'll only be covering the theory portion of the training here. But if you have questions about the behind the wheel training, please do not hesitate to ask me during the Q&A section, okay? Next slide, please. Are there different requirements? The ELDT regulations are the same for Class A and B, as well as S, P, and H endorsements. There are no special regulations that must be followed for the different classes or endorsements outside of the different topics that must be covered. For clarity, what I mean by that is there's nothing that you have to do as far as ELDT regulations go to get your Class B compared to getting your Class A, other than that the topics you must train on are going to be slightly different. No class or endorsement has a hidden specific amount of time or otherwise differing requirement. There's just different topics. Due to the nature of school bus operators requiring a Class B, S, and P endorsements, school bus driver trainees will have to deal with more topic requirements and potential overlaps than your average driver trainee. For example, training on railroad crossings is required for Class B, S, and P endorsement driver trainees, meaning it's quite likely that a school bus driver trainee will train on these topics multiple times depending on when they are obtaining their Class B, their S endorsement, their P endorsement, etc. Next slide, please. Remember, there's no required amount of time for ELDT. You just have to cover all of the topics set forth by the FMCSA for each class or endorsement. The FMCSA has established 29 training topics for Class B, 18 training topics for passenger endorsement, and 11 training topics for school bus endorsement, meaning a school bus driver trainee starting from scratch will have 58 topics they will need to be trained on for the theory portion of their entry-level driver training. As I said earlier, Infinit-I Workforce Solutions is only a theory training provider, so I won't cover the behind the wheel topics in depth, but just as a heads up, there are 18 topics for Class B, 6 for passenger endorsement, and 6 for school bus endorsement. Some of you might have seen the number 63 thrown around as the required number of topics for a school bus driver trainee. That is because the topics in Class B are broken out into 5 different sections. Some people have mistakenly added the section titles to the list of required topics. That is unnecessary. Training on the 29 topics of Class B covers all of the parameters of those 5 sections. But that being said, it's not going to hurt anything if the training you utilize has a few additional topics. As a note, I do want to clarify this. Just because there are, for instance, 58 topics required, that doesn't necessarily mean that your training program is going to have 58 videos, for example. Taking into account our training program, for example, on Infinit-I Workforce Solutions, we cover a lot of the topics in shorter videos, 5 to 8 minute videos, and some of the topics are too broad to cover in that short of an amount of time. So we'll have multiple videos covering a single topic. That's just a clarity that I wanted to throw out there. Next slide, please. So, what are the topics? I won't read through all of these, but we'll leave them on screen for a brief moment. Once again, all of this information is on the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations website at www.ecfr.gov. The sections for Class B are Basic Operation, Safe Operating Procedures, Advanced Operating Practices, Vehicle Systems and Reporting Malfunctions, and Non-Driving Activities. Please note that if you are interested in researching this information yourself, the FMCSA has listed each of these topics with a prompt explaining the minimum information that must be required or must be covered by these topics. That's too much information to cover in this presentation, but if you have questions about a specific topic, please let me know during the Q&A. Next slide, please. Here are the topics for the passenger endorsement. Once again, I won't read through all of them, but we will leave them on the screen briefly. Passenger endorsement covers a number of topics that coincide or overlap directly with the school bus endorsement topics. And as school safety directors or school bus drivers or whatever your particular role is, you're going to be familiar with the differentiation between the passenger endorsement and the S endorsement. You're going to know the stuff that doesn't apply to you most of the time and the stuff that does apply to you. So it shouldn't be a big hassle. Next slide, please. And here are the school bus endorsement topics. The vast majority of this stuff is pretty standard. Again, it's meant to be. The FMCSA's goal here isn't to reinvent the wheel, just to standardize the training that it takes to get behind one. Next slide, please. So, after all of that information, how do you actually go about getting training? The short answer is to either find a training provider or to become one. But this is where things can get a little more complicated. In order to monitor and regulate these new requirements, the FMCSA has created the Training Provider Registry. Training providers for entry-level driver training must be listed on the Training Provider Registry. And yes, that includes you if you are training your driver trainees. Becoming an approved training provider requires submitting an electronic application to the Training Provider Registry, self-certifying that you meet all ELDT requirements, affirming under penalty of perjury that you will only teach the prescribed ELDT curriculum. And for clarity, I want to circle back around on this. This means that you can't teach anything contrary to what the FMCSA is prescribing. You can teach more than what the FMCSA has required, but you can't teach anything that goes against or is contrary to what the FMCSA has requested, okay? And then you also have to maintain documentation proving ELDT compliance in the event of an audit. Once a training provider has been accepted to the TPR, they'll be assigned a unique training provider ID number, which will appear on a driver trainee's record in the Commercial Driver's License Information System. Next slide, please. So registering to become a training provider is actually a very simple process. You just go to tpr.fmcsa.dot.gov. You click on training providers, you click on register now, as you can see right there. And from here, it's a very simple process of following the registration instructions. Basic information you'll need on hand is your contact information, the information for your company, school, organization, whatever the case may be, and any relevant affiliations for your company. After that, you'll need to enter into a waiting period where the FMCSA will approve your registration request. This must be done before you can register training locations or invite additional users to the TPR on your behalf. This is normally a relatively short process. When we went through ours, we got approved within, I think, about 24 hours. And in subsequent tests, the longest I think we've had to wait is about 48 hours to see if we could get approval for something else. So it's a very quick process. That being said, the closer that we get to this February 7th deadline, I would expect that more and more people, more and more schools, companies, etc., are going to be trying to get registered and get this taken care of. So that might become a bottleneck. I would really recommend, if you are going to register on the TPR as a training provider, you go ahead and try to get that taken care of sooner rather than later to avoid any sort of issue with the registration approval. Okay? Next slide, please.
Well, Jeremy, we had one question that came in on chat. There was someone that says that they have gone through this process and they've been approved with their green check mark for their individual, but they are struggling with the section to register training locations. And I know that you and I have talked a little bit about parts of this website that are not active yet. And
Sure.
I did not know what your experience has been with that, registering training locations, if that has been problematic, and what resources might be available to them to resolve that issue.
So there are going to be resources on the TPR. There should be a Q&A section, a frequently asked question section that I would reference first initially. Then there's also a section, a listing on the TPR where you can ask questions, where you report issues or bugs or features like that, or get in communication with someone. That would be the route that I would go ahead and go there.
Okay.
Unfortunately for us, we don't have a training location because we're a theory online provider, so
Right.
we haven't, I don't have any real experience having gone through that. That's one of the 5 questions that you might ask me that I don't have a good response for. So
I got to keep you on your toes,
apologies
Jeremy.
on that one.
But I would
It
definitely
happens.
escalate that, though, for the
Yeah,
individual that is challenged by that, because if that's impacting your organization, guys, this is new technology. And as with any new government technology rollout, there are federal components in play. There are also state elements that are in play. Not all states are moving at the same rate of technical proficiency to make sure that all the buttons work, the automatic feeds work. There are going to be some challenges as this launches that we just need to be aware of, that there could, as we experienced when they rolled out the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse back in January of 2020, it broke because of the response of information coming through. They were not prepared for that. So the potential exists for a similar experience with the TPR. But if there's a challenge that you're having right now, absolutely escalate that, because that may be a profound bug in the system that's not only tripping up your organization, it's impacting other people as well. It needs to be resolved before February 7th.
100%, yes, absolutely. So go to the frequently asked questions section first. See if that answers your question. If that doesn't, there's a registration tutorial video that you should be able to, it's linked right on the front of the training provider's page. So check that and see if that goes through the process for you and answers your question there. And then if that doesn't work right, absolutely contact someone. There should be a contact button to allow you to submit a bug report or an issue or something like that. Yep. So next slide whenever you're ready.
There we go.
All right. So let's say you want to become a registered trainer on the TPR. In order to do that, you must meet one of the 2 following qualifications. 1, you must hold a CDL of the same or higher class and with all endorsements necessary to operate the CMV for which training is to be provided. You must have at least 2 years of experience driving a CMV requiring a CDL of the same or higher class and or the same endorsement, and meet all applicable state qualification requirements for CMV instructors. Or you must hold a CDL of the same or higher class and with all endorsements necessary to operate the CMV for which training is to be provided, and have at least 2 years of experience as a behind-the-wheel CMV instructor, and meet all applicable state qualification requirements for CMV instructors. Next slide, please. There are, of course, some exceptions to these rules. Number one being an instructor is not required to hold a CDL of the same or higher class and with all endorsements necessary to operate the CMV for which training is to be provided if that instructor previously held a CDL of the same or higher class and complies with the other requirements set forth in the first or second qualifications. And then number two, being the important one for us, training providers offering online content exclusively are not required to meet state qualification requirements for theory instructors, though it is important to note they must still meet the other requirements. Also of note is that if an instructor's CDL has been canceled, suspended, or revoked due to any of the disqualifying offenses identified in 383.51 of the CFR, the instructor is prohibited from engaging in theory instruction for 2 years following the date his or her CDL has been reinstated. Next slide, please. So let's say you're a driver trainee and you go through all the required motions of ELDT. What happens after you complete your training? Once a driver trainee completes the required training for whatever they are attempting to do, the training provider will submit data to the TPR containing the following information. It'll have the driver trainee name, the driver trainee's license or commercial learner's permit, the commercial's driver's license as applicable, and the state of licensure. Commercial driver's license class and or endorsement and the type of training, that being the theory or behind the wheel training that the driver trainee has completed, the total number of clock hours that the driver trainee spent to complete behind the wheel training as applicable. And for clarity on that, again, there's no specific time requirement for either the theory training or the behind the wheel training, but when doing behind the wheel training, you are required to document the amount of hours that go into that training so that that can be reported to the FMCSA. Then you'll have to have the name of the training provider and its unique TPR identification number and the dates of successful training completion. This record of completion that is sent to the training provider registry is what allows a driver trainee to go take their CDL or endorsement test. Without this proof of training, the driver trainee will not be able to take the test for their CDL or endorsement. And that's really it for the basics of ELDT. As far as regulations go, this one is honestly relatively benign. The vast majority of this training, especially from a school's perspective, is already being done or should be being done. The ELDT regulations are just helping to standardize what is required, and the creation of the TPR helps organize and streamline the information and tracking process that should go into this type of training. And with that, we're going to jump into the Q&A section.
Okay. Now, one thing, and I know I was talking with Leslie about this because she shared this with me after I had this conversation with her, that yes, you do have to report the behind the wheel training that you do. She had encountered some folks in her conversations out there that were like, oh, we're just going to keep it here on file with ourselves and we'll be fine. No, you have to report it. It has to be in the TPR because that's how it gets communicated electronically back to your state. I would also say this is one of those areas that we know kind of what the best case scenario should be in terms of reporting information, because we have a very specific window of time when we complete the theory content that we have to report that electronically to the TPR. But there will potentially be some bugs there with those connections, the APIs between the state and the federal government, the TPR. We'll need to kind of, there's a little bit of wait and see once this goes live to see how responsive those are. It could be 48 hours. It could be 7 days. We'll have to see how long it is taking the states to communicate back and forth with the TPR successfully. In a perfect world, it should all happen automatically same day. But we know not everybody is going to be there yet on February 7th. So it's just something to be mindful of when this first crew of individuals that you have going through after this new requirement takes place, that there may be delays because of the newness of the system and the fact that not everything is functioning perfectly. That might impact timeframes for your folks.
Yeah. Absolutely, right? As is a best practice with basically anything, give yourself as much time as possible. Don't get into a rush, right? Prepare ahead of time and be prepared for things to not go smoothly, at least initially. My expectation would be probably within the first 3 to 6 months, things will get smoothed out with this whole process, but we're just going to have to wait and see how things go.
Excellent. Now, again, we covered a ton of information today. As some of you I know are already firing off your questions in chat and the Q&A. That's awesome. Keep those coming. We're going to be addressing those momentarily. But again, I wanted to put up the details to get a hold of Leslie. Some of you have already been interacting with her in chat that I have seen. She is able to do individualized sessions for each one of the folks that's on the call with us today. Probably takes what, Leslie, about 25, 30 minutes. To go through the specifics of ELDT, where it's in the library, what the course structure looks like, how does training get assigned out, those sorts of nuts and bolts thing. And then also, what does the reporting look like on the back end so that you can see how that's all recorded as well. So if that's something that you would like to take advantage of, Leslie is doing those calls all day, every day. She would love to talk with you. So please contact her at her phone number or email address down there on the screen. All right, Jeremy. First, I'm going to start with Mark because Mark always has questions for you. So, Mark, what do you got for Jeremy today?
Well, just to make sure, the content that Infinit-I and Jeremy and his team that have invested probably thousands of hours is deliverable through apps on cell phones?
That's correct.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
that's correct.
I'll let Craig fill that one. Yeah.
Sure. Our ELDT content is all included automatically as part of our library for all of our clients. And as part of our offering to our clients, we do have apps available for both Apple and Android phones. Those are available at no cost. They're on each store. You can find them under Infinit-I Workforce Solutions, and they are fully functioning mobile versions of our platform. So you can watch videos, take quizzes, you can even administer the program from your cell phone if you really wanted to, in terms of being able to pull reports or assign out training. So when you come on board with us, we have our client success team that will walk you through the process of how to deploy that app so that your folks can take advantage of that. But that is something that we do have available. So
the other comment I would make, conversation with some risk people that are very much involved in this. The plaintiff's attorneys are very well of the ELDT training as well. And I know somebody asked the question about the hours of behind the wheel time and the actual content. Now that this is going to be mandated, it's all discoverable in the event that the unlikely event, but reality event that you're involved in a lawsuit. So the requirements are there. You're going to be expected to do it, and you will be expected to provide these details in the event that you are involved in litigation as a part of the discovery process.
Absolutely. All right, here, Jeremy, you ready for the questions?
Let's fire them off. Let's go.
All right. Will trainers that are under the 2-year threshold qualify as a trainer on the registry, or should they be used as a training assistant and just not sign off on the final training?
Absolutely, that second one, right? So when you are registered on the TPR, you're going to be registered as an organization rather than a single individual person, right? However, there will be one person for your organization that is identified as the actual training provider, right? You'll be able to add more users to that scenario, but if those users do not qualify, right? If those training providers do not qualify under the list of qualifications that we read off earlier, then they won't be valid training providers. That being said, they can still administer the training that is set forth by a valid training provider. It's just that other individual is going to have to be the final person that is responsible for everything.
Excellent. I think that actually answers a couple questions that we had coming through in chat, but I'll go through those specifically.
Yeah, and that's a pretty broad kind of like situation, but it's basically the important thing to note is if you're doing your own training curriculum, whether that's theory or behind the wheel, right? Just make sure that the person that puts that curriculum together meets those qualifications, and then signs off on each of the training pieces individually themselves, basically.
Okay. Is there a time limit between when the training is completed and the test can be taken?
The time limit between, between completing your ELDT requirements and then actually going and taking your skills test. Not to my knowledge. I believe that the intent there, right, is you're going to have your CLP to get this done, right? So the time limitation is basically going to be your CLP running out. So if you do not get your finish your skills test, your ELDT, and then your skills test by the time that your CLP expires, then that's your time limitation.
Yeah, I know that we have.
And then if you
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, then if you're doing something like a Class A or a Class B up to a Class A, or already have a Class A or B, and you're getting your S, P, or H, then that situation is to my knowledge, there's no training requirement or there's no time requirement within that situation. We'll double check, but I believe the generalized concept is that you want it for a reason, so you're just getting it done.
Yeah, I definitely think we should dig into that a little bit, because in my mind, I'm running through worst case scenarios of people completing ELDT and then taking a test a year from then. Which obviously is not the point of the TPR. It's not what the DOT wants people who are becoming candidates to do. So let's see here. Other questions we got. If a driver has a Class A CDL, has never driven a school bus, but wants to become a school bus driver, and your trainer is a Class B CDL, are they able to train that Class A driver?
Absolutely. So the situation there is going to be, if you already have a Class A, technically you are valid to drive any Class B vehicle, but you can't drive a school bus without having your passenger endorsement or your S endorsement. So you're not going to have to train that Class A driver for a Class B CDL. You're going to have to train that driver for a P endorsement and an S endorsement. So once you do that, you're perfectly fine. And your regular trainer that normally does Class B, S, and P is more than capable of doing the S and P portion that way. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we had a question here from Kim that I think we already answered. So if you have several trainers, do they all have to be registered, or does the organization register and then the trainers are underneath that organization with one of them designated as the training provider contact?
Right. So that is going to be primarily organization. So you will have the ability to add in more individuals to your organization's registry. But as far as whether or not you want those individuals responsible for being on the training that they provide, that's an entirely different matter, right? So you can just have one person be the individual that goes onto your documentation, or you can have there be multiple people that go onto your documentation. So John Doe was responsible for this training. Jane was responsible for this training. That's fine, right? As long as they meet the qualifications.
All right, here. I'm going to throw up and then this next slide here, because it pertains to this question we're about to be asked. Someone was asking about where they can obtain the behind the wheel topics and info. Those are located on these websites so that you can log into
specifically
that.
Specifically the ecfr.gov Title 49 Part 380 Special Training Requirements is going to have the behind the wheel sections for all of the different pieces that you're looking for. Class B, S, P, etc.
Excellent. All right, let me keep on going through here.
And just for my clarification, Jeremy,
Sure.
the individuals that complete the ELDT through the Infinit-I system, that will be uploaded into the state licensing organization automatically.
Yeah, so that information goes directly from the training provider into the training provider registry, which the part of the other purpose of the training provider registry is to communicate directly to the state licensing agencies so that there's no no drop in reporting or tracking that information. Also, for clarity, Craig, can I post links in the chat?
Absolutely. Or Colin can do that for you.
So I'm just going to post a link directly to that special training requirements that I was talking about earlier. This is the ecfr.gov link. So if anyone's curious about going and actually looking at that, down at the bottom, it's going to have all of these appendixes. Appendix A for Class A, B for Class B, C for P, D for school bus, and then E for H endorsement. So you can just click on any of those links that say training curriculum, and it will show you what the requirements are for the theory first and then behind the wheel second, and that'll be broken again into range and public road for clarity, okay?
Excellent. Now, we have had a couple of people ask if there will be a replay of this presentation available. Yes, there will be. We will send out a follow-up email with both the presentation slideshow as well as the video recording on a YouTube link so that you can review that as you need to. And if you have others in your organization that you would like to share that with, you can. So that is coming. We just have to crunch the video down once we end our call today, but we will get that out this week to you all to review. All right, here, what are the costs to belong to Infinit-I? John, that's a fantastic question. And I will say that you need to talk to Leslie. So we'll have Leslie reach out to you after the webinar is over today, because they don't tell Mark or Jeremy or me any of that stuff, but it does vary by the size of your organization. Yeah. Yeah, we are not sales. We are in content and event support. So, but Leslie can get you those details that you need. So,
February 7th, is that the date again, Jeremy?
February 7th, 2022. We are very close, less than a month away.
All right, here, question. If we have a new driver and they do online theory courses through you guys, we would still have to find them a place to do behind the wheel training before they can take their CDL test. That is correct.
Yes.
Now, Leslie, since you have been talking with schools about this, I know obviously schools have the ability to become their own TPR, but you've encountered other schools that are kind of sharing resources between districts if they're in the same region. Would you go in that for just a little bit?
Yes, there's some schools out there that are smaller and they have people that do not want to register for the behind the wheel. So they'd go to another district or a school that's close by to them that has a behind the wheel provider, and they just do all the information for them.
Excellent. So that might be an option if you don't have the ability to be or furnish your own behind the wheel training provider. So, and of course, there are also professional schools that are out there doing that kind of training as well.
I was going to say that, again, not being sales here, so maybe I should not be saying this, but, right, if you've already been doing your training through an organization or something local for years and years and years, check with them. They're probably already registered on the TPR. They're probably good to go, and you can probably just keep doing what you have been doing.
All right.
Just double check, right? That's the key thing, is make sure, double check and make sure that whoever is providing your training is on the TPR and that they understand these requirements. Otherwise, it could come back to harm you.
All right, where can we preview the ELDT training on Infinit-I from Denise? Denise, that's actually a great thing to talk with Leslie about on that demo. So we can have her reach out to you once the call is over with, set up some time, and she can kind of walk you through where things are placed in the library and so forth. Now,
I can also partially jump in and say that from if you're already an Infinit-I client, we're already updating our content. So you might have already seen, if you're a client, that what was previously entry-level driver training for schools has been updated into ELDT S endorsement, right? That was a very recent change that we made, and we're going to be continuing to make those adjustments over the course of the next few weeks as we lead into that February 7th deadline. We're working on getting passenger endorsement up as we kind of speak right now. And within the next week or so, we'll also be moving towards adjusting our Class A and Class B content as well.
Excellent. All right, another question here. So if I have a driver who has the Class B and just needs the S endorsement, they will need the training and the drive time? Or actually, would it just be for the S endorsement? So
it's just going to be the S endorsement, right? Yeah. So if it's whichever, the design of this is intended to be specific for whatever the class or endorsement you're looking for is. So if they've already got their Class B, great, fantastic. They don't have to worry about getting their Class B ELDT. They're good to go. But if they need that S endorsement, they will have to take the ELDT for S endorsement, both the theory portion and the behind the wheel training. That's why I was talking about earlier for school bus driver trainees, especially since you guys have to go through the Class B, S, and P endorsement. It's a lot of content to get through if you're starting from scratch. But if you're starting with your Class B, or maybe you were already a motor coach driver, that type of thing, you've already got the P endorsement, it can be a lot less work to go through at that point.
Will the TPR number supersede the state number that is provided by some states to trainers already?
I don't know that it's going to supersede it necessarily. I think they will probably just be separate numbers, right? This is a federal mandate. This is coming from a federal level. So whatever your state requirements currently are, it's going to be, you'll have to do this from the federal standpoint. Your state may or may not adjust their requirements because of these federal requirements later on down the road. So that's going to be dependent on each state, basically.
Gotcha. Here's one I can answer. How many topics are needed for Class A? We didn't actually cover that in today's slideshow because of the need for bus drivers to get to Class B, but it's 30 topics versus the 29 topics for Class B. So we can follow up with some details for you after that, about what that subtle change is there. So, but it's
there's
not
a single
dramatically
topic,
larger number of topics. So.
Single topic difference between Class A and Class B. And I have no prizes to give out, but I will give internet cookies to whoever can guess what that single topic is in chat.
All right, here. What control will state have over the individual states have over the training requirements? At the current time, I don't think I'm sure they have input into the TPR, but
basically, right. So again, this is a federal mandate, right? This is coming from the FMCSA on a federal level. States later on down the road, and some states might already be doing this, right? Unfortunately, there's too many of them for me to keep track at the moment, but some states might already be adjusting their requirements to coincide with this new regulation. But there is no requirement that they do so. So it's entirely possible. So for Texas, for example, I know that there are already pretty strict training requirements for getting your CDL or getting into school bus operation from a transportation perspective, right? So it's very possible that you're going to have to meet the requirements for both the FMCSA ELDT requirements, as well as your state requirements. So just keep that in mind. But at the same time, a lot of the stuff that you're going to be covering is the same stuff. So you're probably going to be able to do a 2 birds, 1 stone style situation, right? It's just a matter of making sure that all of the topics are covered and documenting that training happens.
All right, here's what we haven't had before. Is there something added to a trainer's CDL that shows they are a trainer? To the best of my knowledge, that does not occur. The only place that information would be maintained would be in the TPR.
Absolutely not. Yeah, exactly. So again, this is going to be one of those scenarios where it's kind of like Scout's honor, right? If you are on the training provider registry and you have a training provider, or you are a training provider, if you don't meet those qualifications, the government is basically, the FMCSA is basically going about this on a scenario of expecting everyone to do what's right and tell the truth, et cetera, et cetera. And there will be audits. I'm going to throw this out there. I expect within the first year for there to be a lot of auditing for this system, just to make sure that everyone is doing what they should be doing. So keep that in mind, right? Don't try to shortchange anything. Don't try to find any loopholes or anything for this. Just do what's being required.
And I'm sure with the purposes of the audit, the goal there is not to find fault with companies that are registered. It's to make sure that the process is communicating
Is
everything
work exactly.
accurately.
Yeah.
But there may be people who are cutting corners that might get caught up in that. We don't want that to be anybody who is on our call with us today.
Absolutely not.
Couple questions about the time frame here. Does the trainee have to complete both the theory and the behind the wheel training before they take their written CDL test, or can they complete the theory, take the written test, and then do behind the wheel and do the driving tests?
So this might be another thing that is state specific. The FMCSA is relatively vague on the requirements for that. The FMCSA just says that you must complete your ELDT, your entry level driver training, before taking your skills test. So it is
take
possible
behind the wheel first if you wanted to.
Right. You could do your ELDT in any particular order. But as far as the FMCSA is concerned, you should be finished with all of your ELDT before you progress further in the process of getting your CDL. Now, some of the states might have different requirements for that, or they might have different processes for that. My recommendation is going to be to contact whoever your normal contact is with your state licensing agency. Again, with a lot of schools or organizations that do a lot of this type of training, that have already been doing a lot of their own ELDT in the past, you're going to have someone that you already talked to, that you're already familiar with. Just contact that person and ask them, hey, what's up? Is there any new process for this, or do I need to do all of this training before I call you and set up my appointment? So that would be my recommendation for that.
All right. We understand, here's one that we've had before. We understand there's a comprehension test required at the end of the theory training. Is that a test after each module, or one final test at the completion of all modules? And I'll speak a little bit to this, and I think that that comprehensive test, it gets confused with comprehensive score. And the way our quizzes are structured, we have one after every single module. Now, we talked about the 29 topics under Class B. That doesn't necessarily mean we're 1 for 1 on training modules. There actually will be several more than that. But at the end of every one of those 5 to 8 minute modules, there will be a quiz, multiple choice, that the individual does have to pass with an 80% or better before they can move forward into subsequent material. So the score comprehensively for everyone going through our platform will be 80%, but we don't lean on a single comprehensive test. One, because depending on the time frame that people are studying, they could potentially be studying. I know Leslie mentioned this a little bit in chat, that if for that 29 topics, oh wow.
Sorry about that.
Is probably
Apologies.
You're looking at between 5 and 10 hours of training time total to go through those 29 topics. If you're testing at the end of hour 10 of things that they learned in hour 1, that is going to be a very challenging learning experience. Whereas testing multiple times as they're moving along through the process will be a better approximation of what they are gleaning in the moment. Do they have mastery of it? Excellent. Move on to the next subject so they can focus on that.
Yeah. And for more clarity on that particular topic, right, the FMCSA, again, is vague in their requirements, as the FMCSA is wont to be. It's just a must pass an 80% for the testing, right? No recommendations or requirements on what the testing has to be, just that it has to cover the topics required. The way we do it is we test on each individual video that you'll be watching in the theory instruction, but that is not required as far as the FMCSA is concerned. My one stipulation that I would always say is, again, if you're going to be on the TPR, if you're going to be your own training provider, just make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't look bad, right? Like if you're going to be audited, make sure that someone doesn't walk in and go, oh, you're doing a 4-question test for the entirety of your training. So, okay, that doesn't look good, right? Make sure you're testing your people appropriately.
Exactly. And the way ours are structured, we do keep the quizzes separate from the material. So it's not an open book quiz where they can go back and immediately reference the sections that we're asking questions on. They are separated because we do want to protect that integrity of the information that people are doing. Are they taking these quizzes legitimately off of the information that they have learned and memorized from the section that they just watched. And if I have them side by side, then I can't claim that. Same thing with tracking time. Yes, there is no time requirement, but if we have 29 subjects and it shows us 30 seconds of total study time, that's going to raise questions at the DOT about what exactly is occurring in this training program. And that's a giant, giant red flag. We see that on our safety training side of things all the time. If you're doing safety training and it's 8-minute piece of content, you knock it out in 15 seconds, what did you really learn? So we try and avoid that by keeping those things separate. Once you are a certified trainer, do you have to train anyone that wants it, or can you just train your employees? That's a good question. I didn't know, Jeremy, on the TPR, does it specify for a registered provider if they are only training internal staff, or if they are training or open to the public?
Yeah, you are not required to be publicly available to train whoever is applying to learn through you. Now there are some minor requirements as far as being on the TPR goes, but there's a big difference between private entities and public entities, and all of the regulations that normally govern those two differences and govern being a public entity and the right to refuse service and blah, 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 those still apply here, right? So the basic ground for your question is no, you don't have to train anyone and everyone once you're on the training provider registry, especially from a school perspective. If you're going to be on the TPR, you're just training your own drivers. No worries.
All right, here are a couple other questions for you. Let's see, we covered that one. Will Infinit-I be uploading the completed theory test scores to the TPR? Yeah, yes, we do. If you use us as your theory content provider, we take care of all the reporting requirements back to the TPR. We have actually a very specific window of time that we have to respond back completed training to the TPR. So we handle that so you don't have to.
Yes, absolutely. I think a couple of people have touched on that topic, but if you're doing the theory portion through us, your students will do the theory portion through us, and then that's it. We submit all of the rest of the information to the TPR directly.
So the 29 modules for Class B, the 18 and the 11 for S and P, we have that content covered. It would just be the behind the wheel portion that you would be responsible for based off of the requirements listed on this website in this section that you would want to make sure that you cover effectively with your folks. And that will be the training that you sign off on and report the hours that driver trainee spent doing that behind the wheel training. So, and that would be something that you would report directly through the TPR. And it's a fairly simple form. It is not live on the website yet, but it's all the things that Jeremy broke out earlier that need to be included. There's basically a field for each one of those things. So it lets you know very clearly what you need to keep track of for each individual. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody, thank you for your time today. We are at our closing moment. Some of you have asked if you could get a better overview of our program. And again, I would kick that back over. That's why Leslie is joining us today. That's what she does day in and day out, is talk about the platform, how it works, where the content is located, how it is assigned out, how it is tracked and reported. So please reach out to her information below, and she can reach out to you and set up some time that works for both of your schedules. Again, probably 25, 30 minutes tops to knock that out. She's very good at what she does. But again, we will be sending out a recording of this information as well. If you do have additional information or questions, rather, that we haven't had a chance to ask, you can certainly ask them offline of Jeremy, and he will be able to get those answers back to you by email, and his email address is on the screen right now. And again, we will provide the replay to everyone who attended today also, so that you can review this information at a future time. But we appreciate you joining us here today. Mark, Leslie, Jeremy, thank you again for your time. We appreciate all of you, and everyone out there that joined us. Thank you, and please stay safe out there, everyone. Have a great day.